What holds the world together at its innermost? What is the final frontier of reality? In this video, we will learn about a fundamental geometric constant of the world and its connections to everything else. Hello and welcome to 6 Dimensions in Color. My name is Schmid and I explain to you Burkhard Heim's world of thought in understandable language and with clear examples. In the last video we found that there must be a lower bound for the gravitational field. That is, below that bound there can be no mass defined whatsoever. We have seen that this bound is within the Schwarzschild radius. Hey, I managed to pronounce it, great. Otherwise I would have said, if you want to have some fun, check this video with Germans trying to pronounce the word squirrel. No, anyway. We have seen that this bound is inside the Schwarzschild radius. Therefore, we will never actually be able to see it. But the good news is there are no singularities in the universe, not even inside black holes, if they at all exist. So this bound of reality is something that characterizes a particle at the very smallest scale, at its lower scale. And now Burkhard Heim asked the question, is there something else that characterizes a particle? And he found, yes, there is the Compton wavelength, which actually characterizes a particle at a very large scale. The Compton wavelength is the wavelength by which a photon, the energy of a photon, is attenuated if it collides with a particle at an angle of 90 degrees. And this Compton wavelength is also a fundamental property of any piece of matter, of any particle. And what happens now if we multiply these two values, the Compton wavelengths, with our lower bound of the gravitational field? We will see that the masses cancel each other out. And we obtain something that has the dimension of an area, of a surface, in square meters. Burkhard Heim named this surface the tau, or the metron. And it is 1/2 times h gamma by c cube. And its numerical value is about 8.2 times 10 to the power of -70 square meters. Heim has made a calculation error in his deduction which led to a wrong propagation velocity of the gravitational field. So his tau value, which you find in his books, will be 8 by 3 times 8 times h gamma by c cube. But this is definitely wrong by a factor of 3/4. If you want to make calculations based on the formulas that he gives in his books, you must pay attention to that. The propagation velocity for gravitation he got was then 4 by 3 times the speed of light, but in truth it is actually the singular speed of light, omega equals c. Regardless, Heim's considerations and major results, fortunately, were correct. The surface tau is the smallest thing that can exist in the world, and this has enormous consequences for the way we do physics. If there is a smallest area that cannot be subdivided any further, then we cannot use infinitesimal calculus anymore, at least on certain scales. And Heim especially developed a new type of calculus for this application. He called it metronic calculus, to do justice to this circumstance. This was then the prerequisite for the development of the mass formula. But the numerical value of tau doesn't enter there. So all can calm down, or worry all the more, that who thought that the whole theory might fall by this one calculation error. That's not the case. It's simply the concept of the metron that matters later. But let's first remain with the directly derivable statements. We're talking about the very small scales of the world, so let us make a comparison with the units of the Planck scale. The Planck scale defines the smallest units in nature, the most important being length, mass and time. And they are also derived from a combination of natural constants. Max Planck deduced them on intuition, which is a great thing, by the way. Intuition, everyone should know how to do intuition on purpose. If you want to learn that, you can check out my homepage. I'm describing there the training, the NATHAL training. but Max Planck knew that they must be important. However, he could not give a common reason why this should be the case. Okay, we have the elementary surface of tau equals 1/2 times h gamma by c cube. So let's compare that with the Planck length. We see that the square of a Planck length is h bar gamma by c cube. That means these two values only differ by the factor of pi, as h bar equals h by 2 pi. And now we can regroup that to tau equals pi times Planck length squared. And this means nothing else than the Planck length is the radius of a circle with the area of tau. The Planck mass now results as the mass of a particle, of a spherical particle, whose surface would be tau. If we take its radius as the minimum radius for any mass that we derived in the previous video. And the Planck time will then be the time that a ray of light needs to go across this particle. Well, isn't that an interesting set? We have all these fundamental quantities somehow built around this tau. And therefore, tau itself needs to be considered as a fundamental quantity of nature. The composition of the Planck quantities was more or less chosen arbitrarily, but the tau is deduced from a combination of two fundamental constants. The one being the lower bound of the gravitational field, which defines the mass properties of a particle, and the other one being the Compton wavelength, which is related to the quantum properties of a particle. For the sake of completeness, I want to mention at this point that the tau was also derived by one physicist, Hans-Jürgen Treder, who was one of the leading theoretical physicists in the German Democratic Republic, in 1962. However, from Heim's notes, we can see that he found it already in 1955, but didn't publish it at that time, of course. Loop quantum gravity also uses the tau as a fundamental surface, but here it lacks a very important property, which Heim found later and which is decisive for the deduction of the mass formula, because in Heim theory, the tau is a function of the world age, which means this area changes with the age of the universe. For Heim, at least, this was reason enough to believe that this fundamental position of the metron must be the starting point for any kind of deduction about physical properties of reality and of particles. So in the previous video, we deducted that space itself must be quantized, and it must be quantized by these fundamental areas we found now. And this is the actual background of the world. There is no further background. And we can no longer consider the world against the background of an infinitesimal continuum. And we must start, at least in certain areas, with Heim's metronic calculus. The property of the metron being a two-dimensional area means that the dimensionality of the world then of course must be an even number. And we're going to deduce that number in the coming videos. However, you already know the answer. Of course, it's 6 dimensions and in color.